So I've been writing my book challenging objectivism is now called The Moral Bias of Objectivism, How Moral Ideals Cloud Objectivity. And it's been very difficult to write. I mean, I'm trying to take down an entire philosophical paradigm, and it's been difficult to gather up all my thoughts and research and put it into an integrated structure. And I think I figured out how to do it today, and I'm super excited about it. I figured out that I could counter Rand's objectivism with the same structure she puts forward. So any objectivist knows that there's 5 parts to Rand's philosophy, that the first 2 parts are kind of corollary, are metaphysics and epistemology. Metaphysics is the study of what is. Epistemology is the study of how you know that you know what is. And then there's morality, how to behave based on the metaphysics, according to Rand, and then politics and art, which are derived from morality, which is to say derived from the ideal vision of man, like how man should operate and needs to in order to survive, as according to Ayn Rand in her objectivism. So I realized that my counter can follow that same structure. So in metaphysics and epistemology, my challenge to Ayn Rand is she had a very poor understanding of human nature itself. And so that is like the base of my challenge to her, that she just says man is born tabula rasa, which is outright false. You can't pick up a book today about neuroscience or psychology or even parenting or psychology without seeing that tabula rasa, blank slate theory, is being heavily challenged across all fields related to human nature, and it has profound impact on how we live as humans. So I can start it there. So part 1 of my book is going to be called Metaphysics and Epistemology, but in this case it's going to be the metaphysics of who we are as humans, with epistemology being how we know who we are. Now my accusation is Rand doesn't give this any consideration beyond some logical arguments about man as a creature of reason. She doesn't truly study human nature. In particular, she does not study the inner world, emotions, happiness, the subconscious. And now, objectivists routinely tell me that these issues don't matter, but they are the foundational premise on which all of objectivism rests. Objectivism rests on the premise that your natural emotions could be hedonistic, sadistic, that they could be totally out of control, and which could lead to mayhem and destruction, and therefore you need Ayn Rand's civilizing ethics. This is the entire foundation on which all of objectivism rests. So you cannot say that these issues don't matter. They do. There's a very basic assumption by Rand. Now you can go read this in the Objectivist Ethics in The Virtue of Selfishness. She makes her argument seem so obvious and like duh, but if you read it analytically, you'll see that her premise is your emotions could be all wrong. You as such need your cognitive mind to go in and program, that's Rand's exact word, program your emotional mechanism. So my first section of the book, part 1, is called Metaphysics and Epistemology. I also discuss how Rand has a very poor, underdeveloped view of reason. Her definition of reason is all twisted and tangled up with her own personal biases. Her definition of reason is that the mind is in control for all decisions. So if you want to break up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, it's more of a rational analysis, that you should be rational in all waking hours, that your gut feels, instincts, intuition play no part in life. Her definition of reason was wrong. You know, she defines reason as something you do, as something to control your life with, as opposed to something that you study with. And so reason is not being used to actually study human nature itself. Reason is being used to dominate life. And so part 1 is metaphysics and epistemology, and I go into that, and I entangle all her views, and I talk about whether or not feelings are a threat to objectivity, what actually is a threat to objectivity, her basic assumptions about human nature and how they're wrong, how all sorts of competing thought about how happiness or emotions are out there and directly contradict what Ayn Rand said. So part 1 is the is. And it aligns so well, except this time instead of talking about how reason applies to the outer world, which is what objectivism mostly talks about and is about, it's how it pertains to the inner world. Now, part 2 is going to be the equivalent of Ayn Rand's morality. Now, here's the thing, I reject an all-encompassing moral paradigm, so I don't call it morality, but I do call it how we would behave. How would we behave if we trusted our inner emotions as having some type of innate wisdom versus Rand's very suspicious view that they might lead to mayhem, and so therefore we have to control them? How does this play out on a daily basis in a typical adult? And what does this mean? I also discuss in this one how I believe moral paradigms cause absolute havoc to one's internal life. It did for me when I was an objectivist, and I outline how it creates shame, which is discomfort about something you did in the past, unease, which is discomfort in the present, and anxiety. Now, I discuss exactly how that happens in the book. It would be a lot for me to discuss right now. It also causes deep envy. I know objectivists will say, well, Ayn Rand was opposed to envy. Yeah, but her system ends up creating it. I also talk about how this moral paradigm causes you to have terrible relationships with others. And Ayn Rand explicitly says to go out and judge others in the name of cleaning up the world of its irrationality and on a moral level. Now, this does not, for any normal person, engender good, healthy relationships. It wreaks utter havoc, and I think all moral paradigms do damage. And so in this section, and this was one of the things I had such trouble writing about, like where does it go in my book? But in this section, I call for a rejection of all performance-based moralities. I argue that Ayn Rand wants her morality to be with you all waking hours of the day for all decisions you make. She explicitly says this. My argument is that and that you need it because you need to be heroic. Now, most moralities say that that's what they're here for, that life has its issues and you need to overcome them with your moral system that's going to help you perform all these heroics. My argument is that morality cannot do that. Morality cannot inspire fruitful, positive action. Morality can only prohibit certain unideal actions. Heroics, living life, all that stuff should be outside of morality, because science, history, case studies, proper nurturing of children, all of that is more important for all that. And so I'm going to call for emotional intelligence tools to replace what all moral paradigms attempt to do. And by moral paradigms, I mean all-encompassing moral paradigms, the ones that want to be with you for all decisions you make, as objectivism does, as does religion. What would Jesus do? They also have an all-encompassing moral paradigm. So part 3 would be identical to Rand's objectivism, her politics. Now, I don't want to call it politics because I want to get away from this idea that government itself guides life in any way, that it shapes human life. And Ayn Rand ultimately says government does shape life, because she says government should be designed around a certain type of man, that the rational producer should have government on his side and not the looters and the destroyers, which is, of course, not the only two types of people in the world. But I call part 3 the application. Now, these are two competing worldviews. One says your natural emotions can be trusted. The other says they cannot, and they need a civilizing ethics put on them. Now, how would this play out? These are two fundamentally different views. And my main argument against Rand, she doesn't study human nature. So my argument is you would study human nature much more significantly before you come up with conclusions of how to apply it. So my book will focus on how this ends up applying to childcare. Now, that's my specialty. I do child developmental research. I think this has been the missing link in many philosophies and psychologies, because they don't understand how child development actually operates. And I have lots of new interesting theories that I present in my books about child development, which is called Misbehavior is Growth. Medicine. I think we can all agree that medicine currently is in a state of absolute disarray. Sex, relationships, and then unfortunately also politics, how this would end up applying in a government setting, which would greatly scale back government. And finally, in part 4, I discuss how moral paradigms themselves cause abuse. All abuse is inside a person's moral paradigm. Now, this is based on the work of respected abuse counselors. Abusers have a very distorted view of right and wrong. Abuse is not unconscious. It is not some latent, weird thing in the back of your head driving you. Abusers are very deliberate and specific about what punishment, war, or totalitarianism they want to pick out, they want to dish out, and they feel profoundly morally justified in doing it. When a parent spanks their child, they think they are inflicting positive behavioral control. Objectivists will tell you it's okay to go bomb innocents in war because it means winning the war. Every dictatorship thought they were fighting for a better society. They feel they are profoundly morally justified, and we can see this now playing out in politics post-2020. So I discuss ways in part 4 of how to stand up to these abusive moral paradigms, because it's not hard. It's not easy to go up against people's entrenched moral beliefs. I mean, you are insulting their gods, their flags, their mothers, their brothers. They feel on a deep level that this is who they are. I mean, this is their morality. They've adopted it on a deep level. It's been amazing to me in my work, and I've been doing work challenging religions and major moral paradigms for almost 20 years now, and it amazes me that people cannot separate the paradigm from the person. If I go after Islam, it's seen that I'm a bigot against Muslims. I'm not. I will be the first to defend Muslim rights. I've worked with many Muslims, and I think most of humanity ends up being good people. They're decent enough people. But these moral paradigms can cause havoc. It's the moral paradigm I'm trying to challenge, but routinely I cannot get people to separate it. They're fused to them, and now eventually, after time, these moral paradigms end up affecting the genetics of a person. Because if you're only allowed to mate with people within the paradigm, that's going to affect your culture, and that's probably where most of these moral paradigms do most of their damage. To me, eugenics is the worst evil. Eugenics itself. So that's the structure I put together, and when I realized I could align it with Rand's objectivism itself, everything just made sense. That her study of human nature itself is wrong, and that's my main accusation, is that she has a terrible understanding of human nature. She attempts to put forward an entire psychology. Objectivism is a psychology. It does not act as a philosophy. And not only was she not a psychologist, I can accept that. She had no experience with people's inner life at all. She was not sitting down to study any patients or describing any processes. She did not sit down and study any of it. It was, her philosophy is entirely built on her fictional stories, of which I'll have much to say about in my book, because the fictional stories do not follow the actual historical events that she based them on either. So yeah, the book is The Moral Bias of Objectivism, How Moral Ideals Cloud Objectivity. You can read 2 of the first chapters and the preface at Ex-Objectivist.com. You can also sign up to be a beta reader for the book if you want. Now that I have the structure, I'm pretty confident I can get it out. However, I'm going to simmer on it. I'm going to take at least 6 months, if not a year, before I decide, like, this is done. I think this book can profoundly change the world. Challenging moral paradigms themselves in favor of the authentic human. I mean, that's, I think, the way the world is moving. I don't think people are quite willing to say moral paradigms are in the way. I'm willing to say that. I think that's what has to happen. And it's not just objectivism I take to task. It's ultimately all moral paradigms, which means all religion. It also means all political paradigms, such as, something like communism. So anyway, Ex-Objectivist, thanks for watching. Bye.